Today I'm going to show you how to make a low sugar strawberry jam, and then I'm going to walk you through step by step the water bath canning process so that you can can your homemade jam. Hi sweet friends, I'm Mary and welcome to Mary's Nest, where I teach traditional cooking skills for making nutrient-dense foods like bone broth, sourdough, ferments, and more, and home canning basics. So if you enjoy learning about those things, consider subscribing to my channel. And don't forget to click on the little notification bell below. That'll let you know every time I upload a new video. So if you are a beginner and you're looking for detail, this is going to be a very detailed step-by-step tutorial walking you through the entire water bath canning process. To make strawberry jam, and in this case low sugar strawberry jam, we're going to need about 4 pounds of strawberries, 3 cups of sugar, and this is just white cane sugar. In my case it's organic. And then you're going to want 4 tablespoons of lemon juice. And then the last thing we're going to need is some pectin that's made for making low sugar jams. And in this case I'm using the Sure Gel in the pink box. And I want to mention one other thing about pectin, because I know some of you have asked me, well, I want to make jam without pectin. And you can, well, at least when I say pectin, without store-bought pectin. And you can certainly do that. You can make your own homemade pectin, which we'll talk about in future videos, or you can simply not use any pectin at all. And I have a video where I show you how to make marmalade where I use no pectin, and I'll link to that in the iCards and in the description below. It's a little more involved. You need to bring it up to a boil, and you need to keep it at a boil depending on your elevation. The temperature varies at what temperature you need to keep it at a boil. I live at sea level, and so it's 220 degrees Fahrenheit. At different elevations, that temperature changes. But the bottom line is there's a little more work involved because you need to keep it at that right temperature and you need to keep stirring it and so on and so forth. And then again, certain fruits work better for making jam without pectin than others. And marmalade is one of those because there's so much pectin in the natural pectin in the rind of the citrus fruit that you're making marmalade with. So if you're interested in learning how to make jam without any store-bought pectin or even a homemade pectin, just pectin-free, so to speak, or added pectin, I should say, then be sure to check out that video where I show you how to make marmalade. Because once you know how to make jam without pectin, like our grandmothers did, or in my case, my mother too, without added pectin, you certainly feel empowered that you can do anything. Now this particular recipe for low sugar strawberry jam is going to make about 6 8-ounce jars of jam. But you'll want to have an extra 1 or 2 jars ready because it's never 100% exact, and you want to have those jam jars ready and clean and ready to fill once the jam has been cooked. So that said, I'm going to move these ingredients out of the way, and I'm going to move the jars over, and we're going to talk about everything we need to do to prepare our jars to be ready to receive the jam once it's cooked. Now for jars, you're going to want canning jars, and you're going to want regular mouth versus wide mouth. You're going to want regular mouth jars. You want 8-ounce size jars, and these are just little decorative ones, but any 8-ounce canning jar will work for this recipe. And then you're going to want new regular sized canning lids, and you're going to want regular sized canning rings. Now you can reuse your rings, but you can't reuse your lids, so you want to make sure that your lids are new. Now today I'm using an electric water bath canner, and I just love this. It was a gift from my husband, and if you're interested in learning more about this, I'll put a link in the iCard above and in the description below where I did an unboxing of this when I received it. It makes it so easy to water bath can because you don't have to worry about taking up a lot of space on your stove. But don't worry if you don't have this, because you've got plenty of options. You can use those traditional water bath canners that you see often sold at grocery stores and big box stores and online. They're the sort of speckled graniteware type canners, and they do have a bit of a concave bottom, so they're best used on electric burners or gas burners as opposed to the flat glass top burners. The stove I have is a glass top flat glass top. So I don't use that type of canner on my stove, but you can certainly check with, if you have a glass top stove, check with the manufacturer and see what they recommend. It can sometimes create like a little suction, and you don't want your stove to break, so be very careful about that. Now, I know some of you have said that you do use that type of water bath canner on your stove, and if so, that's personal preference. Definitely do your research and make sure that your stove and the type of canner that you're going to use on your stove are compatible. Now, if you don't have one of those actual graniteware type water bath canners that are made for canning, don't worry about it. Or made specifically, I want to stress, this is water bath canning as opposed to pressure canning. But if you don't have one of those, don't worry. A big stock pot like this will work just fine too. So you've got plenty of options. Now, in those graniteware type water bath canners and in this electric water bath canner, they usually come with some type of rack in which your jars are going to sit on. Now, if you don't have one of these canners or one of those stovetop canners, and you're just going to be using a stock pot like this, don't worry if you don't have a rack. If you have like a cooling rack that you would, cool a cake on or something like that, you can put that in there. But if you don't have that, don't worry, there's another option. Something that's very easy to do is if you have some extra canning rings, you're just going to take them and you're going to basically take a twist tie and twist them together to where you're making your own rack. And I show how to do this in a little more detail, I believe, in the video where I show you how to make orange marmalade, or I think it's a 3 citrus marmalade, and I'll link to that because there's a lot of detail in that one too. But then what you do is once you link them all together, you just put that down in the bottom of your stock pot and it makes the perfect rack. Now, before we even get started making the jam, what we're going to do is we're going to take our 8 jars and we're going to go ahead and put them down into our canner, and then we're going to fill it with water to cover the jars, and we just want the water to maybe come up about 1 inch or 2 over the jars. We want to make sure that everything's covered. And I'll overlay a picture to show you exactly how I've placed the jars into the canner, and then I'll also overlay another picture to show you exactly how high we're going to fill this with water to cover the jars. Okay, now I'm going to take cool water and we're just going to go ahead and fill this canner, as I said, so that the jars are covered by about 1 inch or 2. Now I filled this with water to just about 1 inch or so, 1 inch or 2, over the canning jars. All the canning jars are filled with water, and then there's all water around. I'm going to overlay a picture so you can see, and I've got about this much water over the tops of the canning jars. Now, the next step is, whether you're doing this in an electric water bath canner or you've got this on your stove, you want to bring this up to a simmer. You're not going to boil it yet. You're going to just bring it up to a simmer. You just want the jars in nice hot water sitting there waiting for you for when we're ready to add the jam. So use, like a medium setting and just have a nice simmer going. Well, I've got this on a medium heat. I'm going to put the lid on and let that come up to a simmer, and then we'll proceed with making the jam. Now, one more thing before we actually start making the jam. I just want to go over the equipment that we're going to need in addition to the jars, and the process that we want to take in preparing that equipment. Now, what I like to do, and you may hear this simmering, this times on and off as it simmers to keep the jars nice and warm, but what I like to do is take these lids and put them into a little saucepan like this. And then I'm going to put some water in here, and then I'm just going to have this on low on my stove top so that the water comes up to a decent, nice, warm temp. And then I'm going to remove it from the stove, and then I'm just going to put it aside and wait and let it sit, let the lid sit in that warm water while we're waiting for the jam to be finished and bottled up or put into the jars. And the reason that I do this is just to keep them very clean. And I know canning practices have changed over the years, and now I think the canning powers that be advise that you just need to wash them well and dry them and put them aside and be ready to have them nice and clean for canning. But when I was taught how to can, you kept them in some nice warm water. And so that's how I do it to this day. I just feel it's a little safer. And I want to mention, you're just going to have this in warm water. You can either warm the water on the stove without the lids in here and then add them. But the bottom line is just a low setting on your stove, nothing higher than that. And the reason is you never want to boil these lids in water like this, or even have them on a high simmer, because you don't want anything to happen to this rubber seal here. And if you boil these in water in a pan like this, you can damage this seal. And I think that's probably why the rules and regulations for how to handle these lids have changed, because I think people may have had them in too hot a water, and this rubber seal was becoming damaged, and then it wasn't making a good airtight seal when people did their water bath canning or went through their water bath canning process. So you just want to be very careful with this. All you want to do is have them, if you want to go through this process, as I said, you can simply wash and dry them and then just keep them in a clean area while you're waiting to can. Or if you want to have them in a little sauce pot like this, just make sure it's just warm water, nothing more than that. So I've added some water to my pan. I'm just going to put this on low, check it with my finger when I feel it's up to a nice warm temperature, and then I'm going to remove it to the stove and just put it to the side. Now the next tools you're going to need are a funnel and a ladle. And as I said, I have a video where I go over all the equipment that you need for water bath canning, and I'll link to that in an iCard and in the description below if you ever want to watch that and see all the various options that you have when it comes to these types of things like funnels and ladles. But these are the two that I like. This one has headspace measures. The print is small though, so I'll show you the other tool that I use. But this is a very handy funnel. Of course, you can use stainless steel if you prefer that. And the same with the ladle. I like this ladle because it has a little hook here that makes it easy to rest on the jam pot. And it also has nice ladling indents. I'm not quite sure what you call it, or pouring indents on either side, or dent outs. And that also is very helpful when filling the jars. So you'll want a funnel and a ladle. The next thing you're going to need is this little lid lifter, and this has just got a magnet right here on the end. And you're going to use this to lift into the little pan, or to put this into the little pan and lift out your lids that you then will transfer onto your jars that have been filled with the jam. And this keeps everything very neat and clean, doesn't introduce any unwanted bacteria. Now, if you're not having your lids submerged in hot water, I still recommend using this. If you just have them to the side in a clean area, I still recommend using this to pick them up rather than to try to pick them up with the sides of your hands. Just use this and put it down onto the top of your jar. Limits introduction of any unwanted uncleanliness. Now, if you use this funnel, certainly it does have some indication on headspace, but you're also going to need something to use as a debubbler, and that's where we're going to go, and I'll show you, we're going to go around the sides of the jar to make sure there are no bubbles in it, to get out as much air as possible, because air obviously is something that we don't want. And the nice thing about this debubbler, that's what it's called, is that it has little notches here that indicate headspace. Now with jam, we want to leave a 1/4 inch headspace, and we'll go over that once we put the jam into the jars. And this is nice because these little indents tell you, and it's marked over here, what exactly what each indent represents. An inch, 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, so on and so forth. So this is a very handy little tool. The next thing you're going to need is a jar lifter, because we're going to use this to put the jars in after we fill them, and then to remove them once they're done. And this is a wonderful jar lifter because it's spring-loaded. It's so easy to work with. And I'll be sure to put a link in the description below to these tools that I like to use. And also, if you want to learn more about all of these tools, definitely watch that video where I go over, and I'll link to it in the iCards, as I said, and in the description below, where I go over all the tools one needs when water bath canning. And the most important thing is that all your tools have been washed in warm soapy water, are nice and clean and dry and ready to be used. Now, as far as these rigs are concerned, I just want to mention that these you don't put into the hot water to simmer. You just want these washed, clean, and dry. Okay, now on to making the jam. Well, the first thing you want to make sure is that you have your 3 cups of sugar all measured out and ready to go. Because when we start to make the jam and it's time to add the sugar in, we want to add the sugar all in one fell swoop. That's very important. The next thing you want to do is take a plate and a little spoon, and you want to put these into the freezer, and you want them to be nice and cold, because these are going to be used to test our jam to make sure that it's reached the proper consistency before we jar it up. Now, the next thing we want to do is take our strawberries in a colander and give them a good rinse. So these are washed, the strawberries are all washed, and I've drained off as much water as possible. Now we want to hull them. Now I'm just going to use a little paring knife. If you have a strawberry huller, great. Sometimes the little end piece on a potato peeler can be used also. So with clean hands, clean fruit, we'll go ahead and start to hull these. Now, don't throw these out. These little stems, and my water bath can is cycling, but hopefully you can still hear me to keep these jars at a simmer. What you want to do when you hull the strawberries, you want to save all the little parts that you hull and the greenery, because you can use this to make homemade strawberry vinegar, and it's absolutely wonderful. I have a video showing you how to do that, and I'll link to that in the iCards and in the description below. So definitely save all these hulls along with the green parts and make homemade strawberry vinegar with them. Then after you hull your strawberries, just give them a few rough chops, nothing fancy. And I'll go ahead and I'll do this. I'm going to put them in a pie plate like this, and let me explain why I'm doing this. After I get a certain amount, I'm going to mash them. This is just a potato masher. I'm going to mash them with this potato masher until they're nice and mushy, and then I'm going to fill a measuring cup to get up to 1 cup. And then I'm going to transfer that to the pot in which we're going to use to make the jam. Because what I want to wind up with is 5 cups of pureed, basically mushed strawberries. And about 4 pounds should lend us about 5 cups, should turn out to be about 5 cups of the mashed strawberries. Now I'm going to use my potato masher and go ahead and start mashing these, and then we'll measure out our first cup of mashed strawberries. Well, I've got these nicely mashed down, and so what I'm going to do is scoop my first cup, and then what we're going to do is transfer it to the pot that we're going to make the jam in. And I'm just using an enameled cast iron pan here. You can also use a stainless steel pan. Anything is fine. Just if it has a heavy bottom, that tends to work best to help prevent burning. So this is my first cup of mashed strawberries. I'm going to go ahead and transfer this to the pot in which I'm going to be making the strawberry jam. And now I'm measuring out my second cup of fruit, and I'm going to go ahead and add that into the pan in which we're going to make our jam. And now I'll just go ahead and I'll continue measuring until I have 5 cups. I'll continue cutting up some fruit, mashing it, adding it to the pan until I have 5 cups worth in the pan that we're going to make the jam in. Now, if you're new to jam making and you're wondering why I'm doing it this way and not just slicing up some strawberries and throwing in the sugar, it's because I find that this is very exact. We know that we're putting in exactly 5 cups of mashed strawberries. There's no air space, so on and so forth. And then we know we're adding, as we've measured out, 3 cups of sugar. Sometimes if you're doing this and you don't have a scale, you may not be able to weigh your fruit to know exactly how much you're putting in. And I know a lot of you don't have food scales, and so I wanted to show you a way to do this, especially as beginners, where you know you're going to be very precise on how much strawberry puree that you're adding to be assured that you're adding the right amount of sugar. And being precise is what adds to a successful end product, and that's the most important. Well, I've mashed up a total of 5 cups of strawberries. I've got a few strawberries left, but that's okay. I'm just going to leave them in there so that we keep the proportions correct, and they'll be nice to make maybe a little mini strawberry shortcake. I have a recipe where I made a video of making biscuits using whole wheat pastry flour. They came so delicious and so light. So I'll definitely link to those in the iCard, link to it in the iCard and in the description below, because I think you'll really like those biscuits. And I think a little strawberry shortcake might be in order. Alrighty, well, as I said, I've got all the mashed strawberries in here. That's a total of 5 cups of mashed strawberries. That's hard to say. And I will overlay a picture so you can see exactly what they look like. Alrighty, well, now come over to the stove with me and we'll start making this jam. Now I've got these crushed strawberries or mashed strawberries over here on the stovetop. The stove is still off, so we'll go ahead now and we'll add in our 4 tablespoons of lemon juice. Next, we're going to put in, while it's still off the heat, we're going to put in our pectin and we're going to whisk it in. A whisk work, you can stir it too, but a whisk works really great for this. And we're going to whisk it until the powdered pectin has completely dissolved. Now when you open the box of pectin, you're going to see a little bag like this. You're just going to want to open this right up, and in here is going to be your powdered pectin. And you're going to go ahead and just sprinkle this all over. And now, as I said, we're just going to take our whisk and we're going to whisk in all of this pectin until it's completely dissolved. Alrighty, well, that pectin is well incorporated now. And before we turn the heat on, I just want to mention a couple of things. Number one, we're going to be bringing this up to a rolling boil, and when we bring it up to a rolling boil that we can't stop, by stirring, it just keeps really boiling. That's when we dump all the sugar in at one time. Now, when you make jam, any type of fruit jam, it tends to develop foam on the top, and you need to scoop that foam off because otherwise it can make your jelly look cloudy and off-colored and so on and so forth, things like that. You can add in a little fat, a little butter, maybe about a half of a teaspoon, not a lot, and adding the butter in helps to break, so to speak. I don't know if that's the right word, but it disrupts the surface tension and then it creates less foam. The reason the foam starts in the first place is because when you're cooking the fruit, it's releasing air, and that's what causes the foam to come to the top. But by adding that little bit of butter in, that changes the surface tension and then allows the foam to sort of subside. It's not perfect, so you still may find, even if you add butter, that you might have to still scoop off some foam, but we'll go through everything. Well, I've got my little bit of butter in there, and now I'm going to turn this up to boil, and we're just going to keep stirring this until we get it up to a rolling boil. Well, I've got this up to a boil that I can't stir down, and I'll overlay a picture so you can see what I'm talking about. And I'm going to go ahead and dump all this sugar in one fell swoop. Alrighty, great. Now I'm going to really whisk this in well, and then we're going to bring it up to another boil. Well, I brought this up to another rolling boil now that we've added in the sugar, and we're going to let this boil for 1 more minute, and I'll take a picture and I'll overlay it so you can see exactly what it looks like when it's boiling with the sugar added. Well, we've had this boiling for a minute, so now we'll get ready to take it off the stove. Well, this looks terrific. Now, even though we put the butter in, there is a little foam. It's getting ready to cycle again to keep the jars at a simmer, but hopefully you can hear me. There is a little bit of foam, and I'm just going to remove that with a spoon, and I'll take a picture and overlay it so you can see what the foam looks like. There's not a lot, but there's a little. Like I said, it's not a perfect system, but adding in the butter does help keep a good amount of the foam down, but you still want to just scoop out any foam that does rise to the top. Now remember the plate and the spoon that we put in the freezer? Now we're ready to use those. Now you want to get the plate out of the freezer, and we just want to take a little scoop of our jam, and we're going to put it onto this plate and get a little more. And we're just going to let that sit for about 30 seconds, And then we're going to tilt the plate, and if the jam is real runny, then we know we've got to cook it a little longer. But if it looks like it's nicely gelled, then it's perfect. Well, this is doing beautifully. It's just oozing ever so slightly. It's not running down the plate, so it's at the perfect consistency. So we're ready to can this up, and then after it's canned and you wait 24 hours and refrigerate one and then go to enjoy it, it's going to be the perfect jam consistency. And even if you just take your jam right off the canning shelf and don't refrigerate one and just open it right then and there, it's going to just be a beautiful, look at this, just a beautiful, beautiful consistency. Because when we put it on this chilled plate, the jam actually feels just room temperature right now. So I want to show you that beautiful consistency. Look at that. See, it just comes off in one sheet. That's exactly what you're looking for if you put it on a spoon. So if you take this off your canning shelf and serve it up, it's just going to be glorious. And if you put it in the refrigerator, it'll be wonderful too. Look at that. Let's take a little taste. Oh, that's delightful. Excuse me. That's a wonderful jam. Not too sweet, wonderful strong strawberry flavor coming through. I think you're going to be very pleased. Well, let's get ready to can it up and go through the water bath canning process. Alrighty, well, we're ready to can up this jam. The first thing we're going to do is use our jar lifter, take out our first jar, and carefully empty out that hot water out of the jar. Now, you're not going to dry this off. You're just going to put it right onto your mat here. If you have dishcloth is good, it may be double thickness dishcloth. This is one of those drying mats. These work great. They're nice and secure. They're a little thick, and so they're wonderful for putting canning jars on. And then the next thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take a clean paper towel. You want to dip it in some white vinegar, and then you gently just want to go around and clean the rim. This makes sure that there's no stickiness, no oiliness. You want to make sure that when we put the lid on, it makes a nice secure seal. And as you're doing this too, through the paper towel, feel if the lid of the jar feels good. No cracks, no little rough edges, nothing. And this one feels perfect. Now we're going to put our funnel over our canning jar, and we're going to fill this canning jar, which is an 8-ounce jelly jar, up to allowing 1/4 headspace, and I'll show you how to measure for that. So we're just going to go ahead and we're going to ladle in our nice hot jam. Now I want to mention one thing. When we did the freezer test and we saw that the jam just sort of oozed nicely and wasn't runny, what do you do if it's runny? Well, if it did run down your plate, don't worry. It can easily be rectified. You just want to put it back on the stovetop, bring it up to a boil again, boil it for about another minute, and then just repeat the whole test. Put a clean plate back in the freezer and test again to see if it just kind of oozes like that and not runs down the plate. And then also if it just kind of comes off the spoon in a sheet like that, one piece rather than a lot of little drips, you know it's all ready. Alrighty, well I think that's about a quarter, that I've left about 1/4 of a headspace, but we're going to use our debubbler to make sure that there are no bubbles. We'll go all around and make sure there are no bubbles, and first we'll check to see that it has a 1/4 inch headspace, and I'll take a picture so that you, or bring in closer so that you can see exactly what I'm going to do. So it's a perfect 1/4 inch headspace. Now I'm just going to go around with this, make sure there are no air bubbles. Doesn't look like there are any. You just kind of want to go around the edges. It's not an exact science. And just make sure that it looks like there are no air bubbles. Looks pretty good. And now I'm just going to go again and take this vinegared paper towel, make sure there's no stickiness. Now we'll get ready to use our little magnet, our little lid lifter, and we'll go into this water. And again, don't dry anything off. Just let it drip. Let's get off any water. And then we're going to put this right down. Perfect. Now we're going to put our ring on. And you've probably heard people say you want it to be finger tight. This is very important, and I want to go through this in a lot of detail. you're going to want to put your ring on, and then you're going to want to just spin it around until you hit resistance. So just till you can't spin, very gentle, no brute force. You're just going to stop like that. Now, once you meet resistance, then you're going to, with your very gentle fingers, just turn it a bit more. Boom. Just until it's secure. So you're going to put your lid on. You're going to meet resistance, doing it very gently. You're not going to be able to spin it anymore if you're going very gently. And then once you meet that resistance, then you just take your fingers and again, very gently, boop, one little bit. And I'm going to take a close-up picture or even a close-up video so you can see exactly what I'm doing. And then I want to explain to you why we just want it to be finger tight, not brute force tight. The only reason we use these rings is to simply hold this lid, the canning lid, in place. Because when it goes into the water bath and you're bringing that water up to a boil and the jars are boiling, the air in the jars is going to be released. And then because we don't want any air in the jar, because air, oxygen, that's the enemy of keeping food fresh. It would cause the jam in the jar to spoil, especially since we're not refrigerating this, we're just gonna put it on a, canning shelf. Certainly you can refrigerate it, and I certainly like to refrigerate my first one because I enjoy having the jam in the refrigerator cold when I get ready to enjoy it. And once you do open it, then you want to transfer and put a storage lid on once you've opened it, because then the one you do open, you do have to refrigerate. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, when it's in the canner and the oxygen is coming out, the air is coming out, the lid is not super tight so that the air can be released. And this canning ring is simply holding it in place. Then, when you lift it out, the change in temperature, there's no air in there now, and when you take it out of the canner with your canning lid, there's a change in temperature, and that's when you hear the ping, because the lid is sealing tight. And then we leave this ring in place for 24 hours. And then after 24 hours, we remove the ring and then we put it on our storage shelf. And the reason we remove the ring is because we don't want the jam to ever have what's known as a false seal. If for some reason the canning lid was to fail, if this ring is on, it may reseal. But that's a false seal. But if the canning ring is not on it and the canning lid fails, you'd know because the canning lid would be loose or whatever the case may be. But the ring would trick you. So once you go to put this on a canning shelf, then you're going to remove your ring. But so the whole point of the ring is just to keep that lid in place, not tight. You want that air to be able to release. So then when you take it out of the hot water, the lid makes a nice tight seal. So just remember, no brute force, just a gentle touch. Now we'll use our jar lifter and we'll get ready to put our first jar down into the simmering water. And then we'll take out our next jar and we'll work quickly and we'll get all our jars filled, and then we're going to bring our canner up to a boil. Well, I got all my jars filled. I used a total of 6 jars, so I removed the 2 that I didn't need. And I was able to get each one up to a 1/4 head space. I have left maybe about a teaspoon or 2 of jam, but they're all filled to within a 1/4 head space. Lids are on, rings are finger tight, and I've got them submerged into the simmering water. Now we want to bring this up to a boil. Once it's up to a boil, then we start our timer, and we want to boil this jam for 10 minutes. Now, as that's coming up to a boil, sorry, I hope you can hear me, it's a little loud, but I just wanted to mention about when we were debubbling the jam. You just want to go around, it's really not a specific science to it, but I just hope I was clear, especially if you're a beginner. You just want to go around and make sure that you release any air bubbles that might have accumulated in the jam when you were pouring it in. And then when you remove the debubbler, if you find that because maybe there's a lot of jam on your debubbler, depending on what type of tool you're using to do this, If for any reason it drops below your 1/4 of a head space, and then you can just use your tool again to measure it, you can just top it off with a 1/2 teaspoon or a teaspoon of jam, whatever you need to bring it back up to that 1/4 head space. Well, I'm going to go ahead and put my lid on and turn this up to high to bring this up to a boil. And when it comes up to a boil, we'll set the timer for 10 minutes. Well, I brought this up to a boil and set my timer and let the jars boil for 10 minutes. My timer just went off, so now I'm going to turn this off and I'm going to take off the lid. Just give it a second to calm down. You always have to be careful because when the steam comes out, you don't want to get burned. Alrighty, that calmed down beautifully. And now we'll get ready to take out our jars. Now you want to go in with your jar lifter, and you just want to be very careful to make sure that you keep your jars level, and then put them down on a bit of a cushioned surface. In this case, I'm using one of these drying mats, or a dish towel can work well too. Nice and straight. And we'll just keep taking these out. Well, I've got all 6 of them out. One just pinged, and as they cool off, you'll hear them go ping like that, and it'll make a nice seal. And then you just want to let them sit here and cool for 24 hours, and then you can remove the rings. And then after you remove the rings, then they're shelf stable. And these lids are considered to be shelf stable for 18 months. I'll put 5 of them in my pantry, and then I'll take one, they're still really hot, I'll take one and put it in my fridge, and then we can get ready to enjoy it. And when we open it and I take the lid off, I'll just put one of those little white plastic storage lids on to replace the canning lid that I'll, oh, did you hear that? Ping. And I'll just use a can opener to remove the lid. And then we'll enjoy whatever amount we want. Then I'll use a white plastic canning storage lid, and I'll put that on in place. And this is the storage lid that I'm talking about. They're just these white plastic storage lids. So when this cools after 24 hours and I remove the ring and I put this into my refrigerator, and then once it's chilled and we'll have it on toast, at breakfast in the morning, I'll use a can opener to remove the canning lid. And then when we go to put it back into the fridge, now that it's been opened, it's no longer shelf stable, we'll use this plastic canning lid, storage lid, another ping, a plastic storage lid just to put on and use this when we refrigerate it. If you'd like to learn more about traditional cooking, be sure to subscribe to my channel and then click on this video over here where I have a short playlist all about water bath canning. And I'll see you over there in my Texas Hill Country kitchen. Love and God bless.